This is the feisty Togruta Cantina on the planet Nashadar, a LEGO creation built by myself. In this video, let me talk you through all the different Easter eggs I've packed into this mock, show you some of the cool building techniques that I've used, and also discuss some of the process and other elements that went into creating this creation. Let's begin. When building this, I was obviously inspired by Chalmers' Cantina on Mos Eisley, because, I mean, if you're building a cantina, you're obviously going to take a bit of inspiration from that. So, you know, elements like the seating in the little hidey holes, the rough shape of the bar, as well as the thing at the back where you get all the drinks from, all of that was taken into consideration. But I also looked at a bunch of other cantinas in Star Wars. I looked at things like art and concept art and all sorts of stuff. One of the biggest sources of inspiration, though, was this piece of concept art, which was actually early art for Ogre's Cantina that can be found at Galaxy's Edge in Disneyland. Now, I really liked the atmosphere of this image, but I was especially drawn to these odd pattern things on the top of the roof. I just thought they had such a cool essence of Star Wars in them, and I felt that it was just kind of right at home in this mock. So I decided to add that in the final product, which of course you can see here. So if you want to see how I built this specifically, it's just two of these random patterns that are built with a bunch of different plates and cheese slopes at the end there. And then the tips have these little clips on them, and they just clip onto these bar connections at the back here. It's a pretty simple but easy enough connection. Another bit of inspiration for this creation was a quote from Dave Filoni in a Clone Wars Season 3 featurette. There's a link to that in the description if you want to watch it. In the episode Sphere of Influence, they do actually go to the Mos Eisley Cantina, and Dave had this to say about that. "We were tasked with recreating a very classic set, and the first thing you realize about a lot of the New Hope sets is how sparse they really are. So for our show, which is, stylized, a sparse set can be very tricky. It can make it look very empty." I thought this was really interesting to note and something that very much related to this mock. So I had a look at the episode itself as well as the real cantina, and Dave's totally correct. There really isn't much going on in these spaces. They're pretty empty. In the Clone Wars episodes, you can see a few additional bits of junk on the floor, so it has a bit of a kind of messier aesthetic and it makes it look a little bit less sparse. There's still stuff on the floor, so things are kind of going on. And then in A New Hope, the set's empty, but it's just chock-a-block full of all sorts of different aliens and creatures, so it makes it feel more full and a bit more alive. So I quickly realized I needed to do the same thing with my mock. My cantina needed to be alive with all sorts of minifigures and colorful characters, otherwise it was just going to be boring. It needed to be like it was in A New Hope, packed full of unique personalities and cool looking characters that you see for 1 or 2 seconds, but you already get this sense that they're a living, breathing character with a huge backstory. So if we take a look at this image here, you can see it with minifigures, but when I take away the bulk of the minifigures and the furniture, it does feel pretty empty and sparse. One thing I tried to do to make it look a little bit less boring is add some more of these rougher textures with some of these light bluish grey rounded tiles, as well as different tiles and plates in dark tan as well. Adding this rougher texture to the floor makes it a little bit more interesting so it doesn't feel really empty and dull. There's still stuff going on. And I mean, that's kind of what they did in the Clone Wars as well. So that was really my biggest takeaway with this, and the biggest lesson that I learned building this is how important characters and minifigures are in giving life to a mock and making it less boring. So let me showcase to you some of the characters, as well as the Easter eggs within them, as well as a little bit of storytelling that I packed into these characters too. I'll even show you how I built a few of them. So we start off by the door and we can see some of the more famous bounty hunters like Dengar, we've got Embo, Bosk, and IG-88 as well. And they're kind of hanging out at the cool kids table, Now Aurra Sing is walking through the door, and I slightly modified my minifigure of Aurra Sing because the original minifigure has that Clone Wars accurate head, which is okay, but it's a bit more stylized, and I felt that it felt a little out of place with some of these other figures. So I instead used the Spooky Girl head from the CMF Spooky Girl figure and replaced that there, and I think it does just look a little bit nicer. So that's a slight change you might be able to do with your Aurra Sing figure too, if you're interested. The next booth has a Gran and a Duros playing Dejeric. And just by this booth, we can see a Twi'lek girl looking for an old friend. Now, this Twi'lek is based off of Mission Veo, a character from the incredible game Knights of the Old Republic. I debated about adding Zalbar, her Wookiee companion, but I ended up not doing so. I guess maybe that's why she's at the cantina. She's looking around asking if people have seen Zalbar, perhaps. So if you want to build Mission Veo yourself, here's the parts that you'll need to make her. We have the headpiece and the head from Ayla Secura. We've got the torso from the Clone Wars Cad Bane minifigure, and then we also have the arms from this Monkey Kid figure, although these arms in this specific color appear in a few different minifigures, but that's just one example. And finally, I used the legs from Finn as well. So that's how you can build your own Mission Veo. We also have a Rodian and a Bith drinking at the bar, and the bartender himself is a Syrian gentleman. And also we can see that he's totally fine with droids being at the bar, so I guess they do serve their kind here. We can see another Twi'lek over in the corner here. Now, I actually built this after seeing a design which was made by Darth Bjorn on Flickr. Again, there'll be a link in the description to his stuff. He's a very good builder. But I thought this was just a fun character design, and it kind of also reminded me of this artwork that served as inspiration for this build, so I thought I'd include them as a bit of a fun nod. And I thought they just fit the vibe of this Cantina very well. And also, if you want to build this smuggler character, you can do so with the following pieces. It uses the headpiece from Ula, the head from She-Hulk, the torso from the Infinity War Gamora minifigure, but you'll need to swap out the arms for the lime ones that come on either She-Hulk or Ula, and then also you'll need the legs from young Han Solo as well, and that's how you make this minifigure. And very close by, I also included this alien. I'm not really basing them off of anything specifically, I just thought the Gamora head worked really well on this alien character. And I think there's a lot of fun you can have with a lot of the Guardians of the Galaxy figures. The fact that they're also space aliens, it just kind of makes sense that could bleed over into Star Wars stuff. So definitely take a look at the Guardians of the Galaxy figures you might have if you want to build your own unique aliens. And if you do want to build this, we can build it with Gamora's head. You can use the hair from this cheerleader minifigure, the torso from this rebel fighter, and the legs from Ezra Bridger. The next few minifigures here focus a little bit more on the storytelling side of things. So I included a bunch of dudes sitting at a table discussing whether or not they should recruit this Trandoshan bounty hunter. Now, given that this was set on the planet Nar Shaddaa, which is the smuggler's moon and a hive of scum and villainy, it seemed only fitting that some of these sort of people would be recruiting bounty hunters in this kind of place. I also thought it was a bit of fun that some of the facial expressions on a couple of these characters here feel like they're in a bit of a heated debate and adds a bit of life here. This kind of counts as an Easter egg. This minifigure was very loosely inspired by Dash Rendar from the Shadows of the Empire video game and books and all the other stuff. He kind of looks like him, not really, but the intention was it was sort of an homage to him. On the next table, these guys are just some friends hanging out, drinking and having a good time. Nothing too fancy, but you know, if this is a place where some of the worst people in the galaxy go, I kind of like the idea that there's just a few people having a good time in the corner. And finally, my favorite minifigures here are these two Mandalorians. I gave them red and blue armor to resemble the red of the fan-named Maldalorians, and blue so that they look like they're someone from the Death Watch. Now, I like the idea that these two are sisters from rival clans, and they're meeting at this cantina here to have some attempt to discuss their differences. Now, if you want to build these two characters, here's how to do so. So we'll start off with the Death Watch Mandalorian. They have the same hair as that cheerleader minifigure from before. The torso is your typical Death Watch Mandalorian figure from the Clone Wars. And the Karma is from any Clone Wars clone. And the legs come from the CMF Alien Avenger figure. To build the red Mandalorian figure here, you'll need the legs from this castle minifigure, the torso from the Advent Calendar Jango Fett figure, and the cloth from this Clone Wars Senator Palpatine. Now, I used cloth here to hide some of the Christmassy elements on the torso. You can see there's a bit of like mistletoe or whatever on the side here, and just angling the cloth a little bit kind of hides that. And it makes this look like actual armor instead of a Christmassy, jokey thing. I also made sure that the character was sitting so that you can kind of hide the presents that are on the belt, but that's a little bit harder to cover up, and I don't know, in this context, it's easier to ignore that stuff and just see cool red Mandalorian armor. And another fun thing with this minifigure, if you put the red Sabine helmet on top of this figure, they look awesome. Now, it's a bit harder to get that helmet, unfortunately. It's not an exactly common piece, but it does look really cool. Some other nice details on this creation include the use of a few different sticker elements. On top of the cantina, we can see some adverts, and they just kind of have that Star Wars vibe to them. Now, these are on an old Ninjago Lego set, this one specifically. I also included some further advertising on these two screens. Now, these use stickers from the Ninjago City set. They're also used as advertising on the actual set, and I thought it worked really well here as well, and I also do get a fun little Galador reference thrown in there, which is always good to have. And finally, if we look at this mock from behind, we can see a patrol trooper waiting by the door to enter the cantina. Also, the cantina door uses some of these spring shooter pieces to form that kind of Star Wars-y pattern for the door. So that's pretty much everything to this mock. I hope you enjoyed seeing some of the Easter eggs, minifigures, and techniques. Thank you very much for watching, happy building, and bye for now.